keeping it low fat. Well, they've got to be lying. And of course, they weren't lying. It just wasn't working. So what would happen is that some of our clients would come in and say, I'm done with this. I had my neighbor tried the Atkins diet. He lost 30 pounds. I'm going on the Atkins diet. And we would say, you can't do that. You're crazy. You might lose a few pounds, but this stuff is, and you're going to get a heart attack. You'll die. You can't do it. But they did it anyway. And guess what? They didn't die. They didn't die. They came back, many of them. I can think of several of my clients who came back losing weight with better blood lipids. Their doctors were astonished. Their triglycerides would drop. Their HDL cholesterol would maybe go up a little bit. Their inflammatory markers would go down. Their blood pressure would go lower. They had clearer eyes. They felt better. And that didn't make sense to me because we had been taught that this was a diet that was going to kill you.
And did you see this kind of work across the board for people? Because I'm always interested in, like, what is the consistent thread? You know, some things work for some people, some things work for other people, and maybe not all of those are shared. But did you feel like there was a consistent portion of your clientele that were really responding from the Atkins approach?
I felt that there were enough people who were responding positively to disprove the notion that low-fat diets and greater exercise on the treadmill was the only way to lose weight. It's sort of the black swan theory. You know, you only need one black swan to disprove the theory that all swans are white.
Right.
And if the only way to lose weight and get healthy is a low-fat diet, low-calorie, high complex carbohydrates, all the claptrap that they would talk back then, lots of aerobic exercise, eat every 2 hours, if that's the only way to lose weight and people are in fact losing weight and getting healthier on the opposite approach, that's enough to say, wait a minute here, this can't be, there's got to be a little bit more to this.
Yeah. So, and we've seen that. Now we're sort of on the other side of that river of low fat. And now we're seeing, you know, there really is an abundance of fat. There's an abundance of animal protein. And there's kind of the other school of thought where it's like, sure, eat bacon, eat, you know, as much meat as you want. And that is another school of thought. I mean, where do we find the true path to health? I mean, you've authored so many books, Smart Fat, Living Low Carb. You know, I know what your approach is, but in terms of like what's out there, if you were to categorize keto versus paleo versus vegan, where do you feel like we ended up in being the best kind of high ground, I guess, now that low carb is or now that high carb or, you know, the whole low fat thing is really a thing of the past?
Well, first of all, I sadly have to take objection to the conclusion that it's a thing of the past. We live, you and I, in you know, the coastal cities, New York and LA, and they tend to be, you know, pretty hip and trendy on the latest things. But the bulk of the people in the country are still very much believers in low fat. U.S. News and World Report and their, you know, annual issue on the best diets is continually informed by that belief, and they rate diets, you know, depending on how much saturated fat they have. Well, if they have fat, they can't be a good diet. So that's very much, I mean, the Cleveland Clinic has now two different tracks in terms of heart disease. They used to have only one, which was Carol Esteson's completely zero fat program for heart disease. Now they have the Center for Functional Medicine run by Mark Hyman. He has a completely different point of view. But let us not think by any stretch of the imagination that the notion of keeping fat low and carbs high has gone away, because it hasn't. Most doctors, at least the ones that I run into, that I don't work with, but that I hear about from people that go to them, still believe that, you know, you have to cut your cholesterol. Don't eat any cholesterol. Don't eat saturated fat, and you know, you'll be fine. And most of them believe in the calorie theory, that it's all about calories. We do think calories matter, but we think hormones matter just as much, and most doctors don't even talk about that. So I would not say that this is a thing of the past at all. I would say it is an evolving thing where people are beginning to accept that there might be other ways to get in the best of health, and that people might vary significantly in what they would respond to. I have said from the beginning of my career that my mantra is biochemical individuality. No two people are exactly the same. We're hormonally different. We're different in terms of our microbiome. We're different in terms of our hormones, our metabolism, our tastes, our culture, our ethnicities, our genetics. And naturally, no one diet would work for all of them. So I kind of have my position is, let's start from basically the factory specified diet for humans, the one that has kind of run us for the 2.4 million years that the human genus has been on the planet. And those are foods, I call them the Jonny Bowden 4 food groups, food that you could hunt, fish, gather, or pluck. And I think that is a great place to start in designing any dietary system for anybody. What is it? You start with what my great nutrition teacher, Robert Crane, used to say, if you're not sure if it's healthy for you, imagine the following, imagine the following situation. You're naked on the African Serengeti with a sharp stick. What can you eat? Because whatever you can catch, eat, fish, or pluck with that stick is probably good for you.
Okay, so I'm going to lay a heavy question on you. What do you do if you don't eat meat?
Well, this is a wonderful discussion and one that I love having because it comes up all the time. I've written about it. I talk about it. I converse about it. I argue about it. There are two types of vegetarians or two types of vegans. The vegan who says to me, I cannot eat anything I cannot, my heart, I just look, I can't, it was alive, I just can't. That person, you don't argue with. The person who says it's healthier not to eat animal products, that person I can argue with. So if somebody's religion or their belief system or their heart and soul or whatever just tells them I can't do this act, you can't argue with that any more than you can argue with what people believe in terms of religion.
Right.
When people tell me there are health advantages to not eating animal products, well, let me at those people, because those people you can discuss with. If it's not, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. People think it's very unhealthy and they're not happy eating animals. Okay, I get it. But so the first thing I would say to your question, what do you do when you don't eat meat, is I'd ask the person why. I was working with someone just the other day. I don't do one-on-one anymore, but someone brought me a very close friend, and they were in some things were going on in their life, and they wanted some basic, some just my take on what to do nutritionally. The first thing she said, I don't eat meat. And I said, why? Because I don't eat meat for the reasons that I said earlier, where I just can't. It feels to me like it's eating my golden retriever. I can't do it. They have, no argument. But if you tell me I don't eat meat because you think it's unhealthy, then let's have that discussion, because in fact, there are lots of ways to eat meat that are very healthy. And there are lots of meats that are, in fact, in my opinion, health foods. And of course, it has everything to do with how that meat was raised and what it was fed and what its life was like. But there are plenty of ways to incorporate animal products. And the fact is that no matter how much our feelings tell us, our physiology was designed to do better with some animal products in our system. There are things that do not exist in the plant kingdom that our bodies need, B12 being one of them, folic acid, folate being another, selenium being a third, heme iron being a fourth, and most important, the omega-3s that your brain is made of. And yes, I know all the vegan arguments, there's omega-3s in plant foods. They ain't the same omega-3s, and they have to be converted to something else, and they just don't do the same job. So there's a lot of evidence that, we really do better with some animal products. And I would have that discussion with someone. I don't just accept it when they say, I don't eat meat. That's fine, but tell me why, so we can find out if this is something that's non-negotiable or something that we might want to discuss. Because the fact is, I can't tell you the number, particularly women clients, when I was doing one-on-one, who would say, I didn't eat meat. I felt like crap. I never had energy. And then I started eating it again. And all of a sudden, sure. Well, yeah. If that's the case, then that's something you need to look at.
Right. So what do you say? What do you think about the classification diets. I mean, I think it's very easy for people to kind of neatly put things into a box. So they'll call it paleo, or they'll call it keto, or they'll call it, whatever today or tomorrow's new diet is. What do you think about the idea that a paleo diet, for example, means you can eat pretty much as much animal protein as you want? I mean, do you think that's, first of all, an accurate way to even describe it? And then second of all, how would you give people parameters within that? Perhaps it is good to eat animal proteins, but are there guidelines around how much we should be eating, and where the other food groups, like you referred to, fall into place on that plate?
Mareya, I have seen people thrive on some of the weirdest diets you can imagine. There is a movement right now headed by a very impressive doctor named Sean Baker, called the carnivore diet.
I know about it, yeah.
100% meat diet. Mm. And you'd think to yourself, even I, who, tends to be more on the low carb side of things, I'm thinking, how can that possibly be? It's impossible, right? Wow. But I interviewed Sean for the next edition of Living Low Carb. I put the carnivore diet in that book, and I interviewed him, and he puts his blood work online on Twitter. And a lot of his followers, many of whom are also doctors, are doing the same thing, and they're putting their lab work up there. Now, this is not science. This is anecdotal information. It's just, they're all ends of one, as they say. It's not a clinical study. These are just different people sharing their data. But damn, that's a pretty surprising. These guys have some of the most impressive labs you've seen. And I asked him, well, what about the vegetables? What about the fiber? I asked him everything you would think.
Right.
I think. And, there's the results. So I'm willing to, I am not a vegan. I don't think it's a particularly smart way to eat, or a particularly healthy way to eat for the long haul. But I cannot deny that there's a guy like Joel Fuhrman, who's been a nemesis of mine for years. He's a vegan doctor that very aggressive about his vegan philosophy. But you can't deny this guy's in great shape. He looks 10 years younger than he is. He's a healthy guy. Clearly, there are people who are doing great on an all-meat diet, and there are people doing good on vegan diets. Some of it is a percentage shot. Like they say in tennis, there are high percentage shots and low percentage shots. I think a healthy life as a vegan is a lower percentage shot. It's been done. Certainly, there are people doing it.
Can you talk about what your daily routine looks like? What do you eat in a day?
I can, but only with the caveat that I don't recommend it to anyone.
I was just out of curiosity. I always think it's fascinating to hear people who are, head first into this industry, how they eat. Like you said, it's different for everybody. Everybody's got their different.
I never recommend it as a path to anyone. I mean, I figured out what works for me over, years and years and years of doing it, and months in which I wrote down every calorie that I consumed and every, gram of every protein and every carbohydrate. I don't do that anymore and haven't done it in decades, but I did do it for a while. So I've done a lot of experimentation and kind of figured out what works for me. And the things that work for me would be unlikely to work for the next person. And that's why I always say, the good news and the bad news is that the guidelines are just really the loosest of guidelines, and everybody really has to find their own road, their own path, sure. And it's going to be different for everybody. And we're
just curious about what you eat.
I have gone on kicks in which I eat. I've done, a few days of meat only. I've done days like that. I do a lot of. It also depends on the kicks. There are a few staples in my diet. I make my own yogurt. I make very high fat, high probiotic yogurt that I make myself once a week, and I eat that during the week. I drink a lot of raw milk. I'm very big into, raw, unpasteurized, unhomogenized dairy. Berries, cherries, nuts are a huge staple in my diet. I said burgers, salmon, wild salmon. Mm-hmm. And I make juice every day or every couple of days, which is what I started by telling you how I found your fruit and vegetable wash, which is a staple in my house. So I make, pretty much every day, or enough to have it in the house 6 days a week. I make, a huge big bunch of fresh juice, which I drink all day long. And then I do some intermittent fasting, sometimes by accident. I play tennis every morning at 7:30, so sometimes I don't eat till noon, and there's a